Okay,
Okay,
go ahead.
well, let's start this meeting for tonight. And Frank, you want to go ahead and start off? Oh, what do you got to do?
Yeah, did you want to do the pledge and the roll call? All 7 members are present, so we're good for roll call.
Okay. Yeah, we could do the pledge. Stephen, can you hear me? Would you like to lead us in the pledge?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
Of the United
United
States
States
of America and to the
the
republic
republic for which it stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Oh, very good. Thank you. Okay, any changes to the agenda, Frank?
None.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, just a couple things before we get kicked off. Here's the bottom line today. Just kind of jump to that real quick. Is this committee ready to push the recommendations to the Planning Commission? At the end of the day, that's the question in front of you this evening. Just kind of running through some of the topics on the agenda that we have from the data perspective of it. This was as of January 21st. We had 217 active permits, 99 pending, and we were getting new about 7 permits per week. One of the comments, that our community development director made last meeting, and just something we've got to be mindful of is, if as this progresses with potential caps, last time when the moratorium conversation came out, we saw a run on permits. So right now we have 7, but that may be a reality of what happens as this progresses. One of the questions from last meeting was, the kind of the dynamics, the demographics of what we have as far as owners. We do have 28 owners with multiple VHR licenses. And within them, within all of them, the actives, there are 9 LLCs, 3 corporations, and the rest are all sole proprietors. One question I know Mr. Thornburg asked is about fire regulations, fire pit regulations. And just to kind of pull it up here real quick, I didn't put it in the agenda, but and this could be something that you recommend this evening for the Planning Commission to continue with. But so recreational, and it's not in the VHR code, but recreational. So there is a restriction or a code section for recreational fires. Recreational fires shall be maintained at a minimum of 25 feet from a structure or a combustible materials. So there is, some code restrictions out there, not in the VHR code, but it's elsewhere within our code. So the committee, if you just kind of scroll down a little bit, Eli, on the accomplishments, and these all ultimately got put in the code. And the Planning Commission still will have to massage some of this language. We've got it in there somewhat for placeholders. And just so the committee is aware, a lot of these things or some of these things still need to be vetted operationally. How does, from a staff perspective, we execute these, and how from a community member perspective do we communicate these? So there are still some nuance still out there, but from a recommendation perspective, just reading these top to bottom, the committee wanted more punitive action for violators. So the violations doubled the fines and no warnings from where it's they currently what is it here? $500 to $1,000 to $2,000, because right now it's $250 to $500 to $1,000. So now they're going from that to $500 for your first violation, $1,000 for your second, $2,000 for your third. Again, no warnings. And we added language that states per event. So meaning, you know, and also with that, and within the code, you have 3 strikes and you're out, if you will. So if you have, you know, three penalties that you know, warrant fines, you know, you lose your license for a period of time. One of the things that we clarified in there is per event. So by way of example, you could have one night where you have, you know, multiple violations, but that's one night. So that counts towards 1 strike towards your 3 strikes. We accelerated the operating without a permit. We wanted to make that very punitive. There was a warning for that first time, $2,500, second time, $5,000, third time, and $5,000 per day thereafter. The community development director has the authority to revoke a license. Right now, they has to go to the planning commission. So we already have, you know, within the code the steps. So to not make it political, the community development director has that authority. Ownership limits. This is something that came from last meeting. Although the very specific percentage was not defined by this committee, a cap on single family residents is recommended for the planning commission to establish that percentage. A limited number of VHRs that a single entity can hold. You know, that can be a corporation, LLC, individual, whatever, how many, 2, 4, 10, whatever the number is, there's a limit how many that you can own. That's one recommendation to the planning commission. Didn't establish the limit, but recommended a limit. Revoke or suspend inactive VHRs to not count towards the ownership limits, the caps. The rationale behind that was that there, you know, and we heard this even from the public on this, is, you know, if you do have a cap, there's a lot of folks that may not, you know, use theirs each and every year. So those should not count towards the cap if they are inactive. So again, this is one of those where I think additional vetting needs to come out. Maybe it just goes into inactive status that doesn't count towards the cap. I know that right there it has revoke or suspend. Maybe that's a poor choice of words. Maybe the other alternative is just inactive. You know, but again, that's something that can be further vetted both operationally and through the planning commission. And operating standards, adding a noise plan, a mitigation plan. It needs content, but nonetheless, that is one of the things that is required. Add a reference within the code to adhere to the night sky ordinance. Add classes. So part of your steps to acquire a VHR is to successfully attend and pass a VHR class, live or virtual. Again, we need some content, and that's again from an operational perspective and somebody to deliver that, but that is a requirement. We did change the terms from tenants to guests. Under operating standards, parking, you know, we added the statement in there overnight because during the day there's not a maximum. So within those parking limitations, we added overnight and not during the day. You know, permitting and operating standards, we reviewed that. That was a comment out there to make sure that they were consistent, the permitting and operating standards. Under operating standards, eliminate F and H. And I think F, well, yeah, F was animals. I think there was a limitation on or restriction on animals that was eliminated, and H was additional requirements or miscellaneous requirements, I believe, that they were redundant, so that was eliminated. Under permit issuances, we eliminated G, which was a 2-night minimum. nuisance and safety, and I think this one needs, further. When I was, reviewing this before the meeting, I think this one needs even further vetting. Again, it could be tonight that we talk about it, and or just, make sure that the Planning Commission further vets this. We did double the fines, but I know part of the conversation, and I don't think it's clear, things like your trash can being left out. So does that warrant that doubling of a fine? Does that warrant a part of your 3 strikes? So it wasn't clear to me, and I don't think it's clear in the language. So I think that just needs to be kind of vetted out there a little bit further. Reference trash in the operating standards. And this last one, and this is more ultimately when we're complete, and the city council will ultimately set that. But through this process and just through the maturation of the policy, our costs are higher than they originally were. And how permit fees work is we can't make money on permit fees, but we need to be able to recover cost. So at the end of the day, once it hits the planning or the city council, the fees for permitting will be adjusted. Also attached is just the copy of the draft inserting all these items. There were a few things in here that I see weren't delineated that I did have part of my notes when I reviewed. One is in an inspection period. So as we know, when you get your license, there's an inspection at that time. And I have within my notes that, and I don't have a period, that an inspection period, 2 years, 3 years, sometime needs to be re-inspected after your first time. So I think that's something that was discussed that ultimately didn't get in here. Again, that could be something that the committee can give a recommendation tonight, or be one of those things that the Planning Commission inserts for some period. Then finally, again, my final review today of the policy, and again, this could be something the Planning Commission reviews or the committee can make recommendation or comment on, is very specifically in findings of approval for staff. So I'll just read it. Prior to approval and application for vacation home rental, the director shall find all of the following to be true. And the one thing that is subjective and just trying to get staff, staff wants to be black and white and apply the policy, but it still states in here that the residential character of the neighborhood in which the use is located will be maintained and preserved. And it goes on. The residential character still isn't defined. So it puts staff in a precarious situation of an undefined area so from my final review of this is to strike that completely, or unless we define it. If it's not defined, it should be stricken. Again, that's one thing that could be also just passed on to the Planning Commission. So, Mr. Chair, that concludes, my opening statements, and whatever the committee's pleasure is moving forward, vetting these. Again, going back to my initial question, bottom line, is the committee ready to push the recommendations to the Planning Commission? Make adjustments. You can make adjustments tonight, or you could also have future meetings if whatever the committee desires.
Okay. Well, yes, Cindy, go ahead. We can't hear you.
If you had a statement to make, I would say go ahead, Councilman Mintz. But I just wanted to say I do have a couple of things that I think we should bring up relative to.
Oh, go right ahead.
Well, one of the things that came up in actually more than one at this point of the community letters, goes to a bit the distinction that we had started to make between primary residence home shares. In other words, VHRs, they're at least occupied by the owner more than part-time, and investment VHRs where they have an absentee owner, pretty much. And it came up relative to caps, and it came up relative to inactivity. in two different, one letter it came up relative to caps, and another letter it came up relative to inactivity. And so I was wondering if we were going to retain that distinction because it's not currently in the regulation. And if we were going to retain it, perhaps I would suggest that primary residence home shares, i.e. a primary resident being defined as someone who lives in the home a majority of the year, is registered to vote at that home, perhaps be exempt from the caps and exempt or have some kind of qualification on inactivity. Because some people who are only, say, renting a bedroom in their home are going to possibly have a higher level of inactivity than someone who is never occupying the home at all. It's just a thought.
Okay.
Yeah, I hate to see, I see where you're going, and it's just going to create, I think, a lot of work as far as the distinction. And then how often are you verifying, are the people living there? You know, and it's a business, whatever way you look at it. The degree of business and your investment, you're not going to do it unless you're making money. So for us to be able to segregate and have flow chart A and flow chart B, I think is, you know, too much to be able to put for regulating it. And then you've got distinct rules that are going to apply for this one and going to apply for that one. Either you're a VHR or you're not, is my opinion.
It just seems to me that if we're going to review permits for safety regulations on some kind of basis, be it 2 or 3 years or whatever it might be, that this type of ownership situation could also be reviewed at the same thing. All they have to do is essentially submit a copy of their voter registration to prove that they live there. Most people register to vote at the home they live in, regardless of how long they're there. I think it's, I would leave it up to the development director to determine whether or not it's too onerous for his department to handle.
Well, we're still talking about almost having like 2 sets of rules. Now we'd have to almost start over with this thing.
No, I think we're only talking about the letters that we received from the public really only referred to caps and density. That's what they referred to. You know, one letter talked about whether someone who rents out their bedroom once in a while in a very irregular fashion should really be someone that is subject to a cap. And the other one was pointing out someone that again, because they live in the home, is renting so irregularly, whether or not they should be subject to an activity clause. That's all. I mean, the inactivity clause, you know, is easy enough to deal with because obviously, I don't think was necessarily clear when we put out the regulations on inactivity. It's not like we're just going to revoke someone's license. If something is deemed inactive for whatever period, they would obviously be given an opportunity to say, no, I am active and here's the proof. But anyway, I did want to bring it up. It's just, like I said, it's coming from letters from the public that we all saw. So that's why I wanted to bring it up.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, this is Jim
Yeah.
Cruchat. Oh, go ahead.
Oh,
Are we taking comments from the panel? Okay. Jim Cruchat, longtime listener, first time caller. You know, to answer, I agree with Jim Thornburg that, yeah, it's either we have a regulation for you are a VHR or you're not. And I don't think we need to make it more difficult by deciding, oh, if you live, there's a rule for you. And if you're outside, I think it's just boom. If you're going to run a VHR, you have to meet these requirements. The only other comment I would make, I notice when we go through our logic, we use a lot of mishmash. We sit there and we'll use the logic of a long-term rental saying, hey, we don't limit how many long-term rentals you can have, and we don't limit, but then we come back to short and then apply it to a short-term rental, or we look at Palm Springs and we say, this is how Palm Springs defines a financial entity, but Palm Springs doesn't have any limits, nor does several other towns in the local area. And well, I've made my voice concerned on what limits do, and dipping into there. And when we say we're going to have a limit on what we have, and I'm reiterating, now we have an economic entity that's capped, and we have to look at how we equitably distribute those types of things. My concern, I think that we can go ahead and push this forward to the Planning Commission with the recommendations. I think the sticking points are still going to be, what is the cap going to be if we have one? And we've got other things that, how do we find a noise mitigation plan? And then the last thing I would add is that when we get back to this question of residential character of the neighborhood, I think Frank brought up the fact that we haven't really defined that. And the existing regulation, isn't it say it can't be detrimental to public health, safety, or welfare of the residents of the neighborhood? And that's how we define it? I'm just questioning.
Yes, it further goes on to say that. Yeah, I paraphrased but stopped it, but just reading the whole sentence here, that the residential character of the neighborhood in which the use is located will be maintained and preserved, and the issuance of the permit will not be detrimental to the public health, safety, and welfare of the residents in the neighborhood, or injurious to the community within the vicinity in the district in which the use is located.
Well, isn't the challenge, and having been to many planning commission meetings where there were appeals, and the planning commission would basically say, we have no way to interpret that, we need guidance, therefore we're going to deny the appeal. It's problematic, and I think that it's you know, we've already demonstrated for the last year or so that there are multiple interpretations about what's detrimental to the neighborhood. Some people feel that being surrounded on four sides by VHRs is detrimental to their neighborhood and their well-being. Other people say, oh no problem, it's fine with me. So there's a diversity of opinion on that within the community that's very clear. And I don't know how you solve that clause, given that opinion.
I don't think you're going to be able to solve that.
Well, and that's why staff, you know,
I still think we're seeing a lot of NIMBY, not in my backyard. I mean, the reason why we're here is because the main thing that came out, we first said, oh, it's going to cause noise and disturbance in my neighborhood. Yet from what we've seen, we're not getting that many complaints about that. Oh, it's a commercial activity. Well, California Court of Appeals has defined that no, it's an activity you can't have, because they've already defined that. So here we are beefing up our regulation or our ordinance, and that's where we are. I think the big question is, do we do limits or not? I mean, or caps or not?
Well, I think that one, we're not here only because of nuisance regulations, and there were several of us that have been pointing out for some time that the nuisance regulations are beside the point. We're here because people are upset that these commercial businesses that have absentee owners are invading the neighborhoods and making them into motel corridors. And I think some of us are not happy about living in a motel corridor. We're not, you know, I don't think anybody really has a problem with the home shares, people that are using a part of their home, or people that are using an ADU on their property, or people that live there full time. I think the issue is primarily with absentee owners operating purely commercial businesses in neighborhoods. And this is actually why I also would take exception to the comparison that came up a few meetings back that seemed to have turned a few of the people on the committee against the idea of limits, which is there is a big difference between swimming pools and VHRs. Swimming pools, yes, everybody can, you know, apply and have a swimming pool, and a swimming pool is something you put in your backyard. And and of course, all neighbors should equally be able to have swimming pools. But when you have an absentee owner VHR, that is not like a swimming pool, because the owner is no longer in the home. There is nobody living in the home. That is the difference. It's a qualitative difference that affects your quality of life in your neighborhood when you don't have people living next door to you anymore. And I think that is the point that most of the people that want some kind of limit are trying to get across that keeps getting lost.
Okay, is any other panelist like
I
to
don't think
make
it's
a
getting
comment
lost. I
before we go to
understand.
public? I'm sorry, Jim, go ahead.
No, I'm done. Go ahead. If you're going to public comments, I'm fine with that. Otherwise, we're just going to be reiterating the same points.
Right. So does any other panelists want to say anything before we go to public comment?
I
Hearing
did
none?
want to say one other thing, which is we did get some letters, and I don't think we've said this yet. We did get some letters that were worried about what would happen if caps took place and they were in the middle of a renovation, or they were in the middle of a renovation or construction, and somehow they got caught because they weren't able to finish before the caps came in, and they were over the cap. This kind of concern, and I just wanted to say to the owners that were worried about that you know, planning is still going to be there, and if you get caught in the middle, you can always go to planning and request a variance. It's not like this is going to be absolute when we bring in some kind of new regulations on STVHRs. I mean, planning will be able to help you out
Well, this
if
committee doesn't
you get
make any
caught
policy for
in
staff.
a
now,
hardship.
so let's move on to public comments. So Eli, do you have somebody that would like to make a comment?
I have 2 comments. I'll read into the record. If anybody else wishes to speak, please raise a virtual hand and I will call on you. But the 2 comments I have right now are from Jonathan Hume. Residential character is impossible to define clearly, i.e. in a way that diverse groups of residents would accept. Let's not forget that many of these quote unquote absentee owners live next door or elsewhere, right in 29 Palms. Let me see if we have any other people who wish to speak. I have 3 hands raised. All right, we're going to go to Ryan Ellebrocht. You're unmuted on my end. Please unmute yourself.
Okay. Yes, I appreciate what you guys are doing. And Cindy, what you had last said kind of hints at our situation where we recently purchased a home. I mean, it's primarily going to be a family vacation home, but at the same time, we were planning on maybe renting it out occasionally. And we just don't know where we stand in the process. We've already applied for 2 permits, and I guess getting caught in the limbo of this potential regulations a little bit daunting. What is, I guess, and also what specifically does variance mean? You would reference that. That's it.
Yeah, and I could answer, you know, the variance side of it. You know, that's an exception. You know, the tough part of that is it puts the planning commission in a precarious situation of granting exceptions. You know, there has to be a justification for an exception. But you know, so it's an exception, bottom line.
What's the deadline for the variance? Is there a deadline, or we would just
So those, you know, you have to apply. So there's no deadline. So you have to apply for and pay for the planning commission. And I don't have the fee in front of me for that. I apologize. But you have to apply for a variance to the planning commission for them to hear what you're requesting for an exception. So there is no deadline. We get variance. You can get variances on any policy at any time.
Okay, and then just to go back to the heart of the matter, I know you would reference that you guys are here having this discussion because of neighbors feeling like nobody's living next door to them. I feel like it's much more complicated than that. And my intuition was that you were having this meeting because there were a lot of influential, I guess, investors is the best way to describe them, that were kind of overwhelmed by the amount of competition they were getting. They were no longer able to charge as much as they had expected to. And they somehow were able to infiltrate your world and try to put a cap on this. And it's frustrating for me. I mean, we recently moved to California, and my mother-in-law's nail store was shut down for the whole pandemic, and just to see how businesses are treated in the state is very frustrating. And it made sense for us to have a vacation home as a family, and we were absolutely in love with the area. And then to, in that calculation, say, you know what, maybe we can rent this out a couple times a month at most, and then to have that potentially taken away is it's frustrating.
And Mr. Chair, if I may clarify something, our community development director is listening and actually sent me a text. So for a variance, one key element of a variance is you have to prove it requires hardship. So there has to be some kind of hardship as part of it. So.
Okay, thank you. And the only thing about Ryan, your comment about we were infiltrated by people wanting caps just so they can make more money, that has nothing to do with why this committee was formed. So
Yeah,
go ahead.
Maybe I've seen Chinatown too many times.
Maybe, yeah. We're not that sophisticated. So, okay, go ahead. Next.
Okay, so the next person I'll call on is Eddie Garcia. You're unmuted on my end. Go ahead from your end.
Hi, thanks for taking the time to hear my question. I first wanted to comment, though, that Ms. Bernard earlier was commenting accurately on sort of the nature of the neighborhood being sort of distinguished by whether or not there are neighbors living next door. Me and my family have lived here for 20 plus years. I grew up here, almost actually 30 plus years now, sorry. And although we witnessed changes in our neighborhood for all kinds of reasons, it is a bit like disconcerting to see how expensive our costs for construction are. And I know there's lots of reasons for that, but definitely one of them is a lot of homes are being renovated as Airbnbs to be rented out. And our concern is definitely that with not much of the stock of homes being increased, but the stock of VHRs going up, it may be just 5 or 6% of homes now, but like, where do we stop when the percentage of homes keeps growing that are not being lived in, that are not being used for residential purposes, but commercial purposes? It does make a difference to the people who live here, like me and my family, that we know that there are empty homes nearby that are not being used for any other purpose than to make someone wealthy who is not living here. They are maybe vacationing here, but they are not full-time permanent residents. And it's important that a limit be set, a standard be set, because even though, yes, in the area, there are a lot of places that don't have caps, a lot of places in the low desert answered at the end of 2021 that they have effectively banned VHRs and are no longer issuing new permits, which is important to note because they are dealing with the fallout from having lost inventory for homes for people to live in to vacation homes. And my question, which is hopefully something pretty simple, is will there be advocacy for caps on, say, your end, any of you in here in the panel now, or any advocacy in the planning committee? Is there going to be anybody there saying there need to be caps? Thank you.
Anybody else, Eli?
Yeah, we have a number of people. So I'll read a couple of questions into the record. I have a question from, almost more like a comment from Heidi and Chuck Hurd. Residential characteristic is knowing who your neighbors are and not having strangers next door every few days or every weekend, etc. Oh, sorry, hold on. I'm stopping the timer for the last speaker. And then we have another statement here from Kat and Tally Jones. Hi, we live in west of Indian Cove full time. In our area, 50% of buildings are VHRs. We are also in an area where VHRs are being constructed on undeveloped land. Buildings out of scale with the other houses in the neighborhood. We would appreciate caps and a design review so we don't have massive buildings overlooking our house. And the looks like Kathy Santiago is asking for an explanation of what you mean by a variance. And she followed up, and can you please explain this in relation to a VHR permit? Thank you. So I'm giving you that. Looks like, let's see, we have one open question. We still have 5 people, their hands raised, so I'll go ahead and call on Teeny H. You're unmuted on my end. Go ahead on your end.
Hi, I have a couple comments to make. My first comment would be that, frankly, if everyone in the city put a swimming pool in their backyard, it would become a significant issue. Like everything, there's a tipping point. We have water as a resource here of concern, and so I find this analogy to be inaccurate. The idea that we could just increase swimming pools and it wouldn't ever be an issue and require regulation is kind of laughable. Second of all, I find it really disappointing that we consider we're considering our city only in terms of economic dollars. It's difficult to put a financial value on community and neighborhoods, and I just find it disappointing that because that's difficult to quantify, no one has bothered to attempt it, and no one has included that value in their calculus here. Third, I want to comment on, as somebody who lives next to a permitted vacation home rental, there is a lack of reciprocity that is missing because there's no full-time resident there. When that property was vacant, I had to call the sheriff and report a break-in. There's no one who lives there who could do that for me back. That's an element specifically that affects me that's missing because I do not have a neighbor there. Fourth, excuse me, the city of 29 Palms looks at this as a discrete market issue, but our housing market is inseparable from that of Joshua Tree and Yucca Valley. We need to be considering this and sort of the overall capacity of short-term vacation home rentals, because when the real estate market crashes, we're going to be affected by the 2,000 short-term vacation home rentals in Joshua Tree. That's unavoidable. We're not a separate entity without any relation there. And finally, I've been really disappointed. I've heard a lot from the city council and the planning commission of all of these efforts to educate short-term vacation home rentals owners on how to be, responsible and polite. And I don't hear any of those efforts for long-term renters. People regularly complain about, the way that residents in the city manage their long-term rentals, but there's never any effort or suggestion that the same sorts of programs that are, suggested for short-term vacation home rentals are never extended as well to those long-term vacation home rental owners. And I'm really disappointed by sort of the preferential treatment that these other subset of people who operate in our city get over the people who are invested in the long-term success here. Thank you.
Okay, next I'll call on David Trin. You're unmuted on my end. Go ahead.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I've been living in 29 Palms for 15 years now, and I now have VHRs all around me, and I would say this is the best experience, best community living I've had since I've lived here. All these new people coming in and out, they are the kindest, nicest people, and I hang out with them more than I did when I had long-term neighbors. All the long-term neighbors are gone, and I never hung out with them anytime. I never was friends with them. This sense of community, I understand what we're asking for here, but this is an individual, subjective type of thing. I'm sure some of you are not having good experiences with VHRs because a sense of community, but I'm having a better experience from it. I'm meeting people from all walks of life. I'm learning so much about different cultures, and I feel like this is great. And I And I actually am in that subgroup where Cindy mentioned earlier, where I think we should define if an individual is part-time, absent, or if they're living there and they're renting a room, because I want to stay in this community, but times are hard. And if I don't find some supplemental income for my home, then I won't be able to be part of this community. And so I think we should define if you're living here, most of the time, or you're just renting a room out, then it shouldn't be subjected to the full absent VHR type homes. And yeah, I mean, I've been here for a long time, and I love it, and I want to stay forever. But all my neighbors before, even though they've been living there as long as I have, there was no community. We're not having a bonfire where we're all going to each other's house. We're not, we didn't have block parties where someone would, invite everyone over. Everyone, did their own thing. And now that I have VHRs all around me, everyone's interested in hanging out with me and inviting me over. And I have more sense of a community now with all these different individuals. So I don't know what the whole deal is, where all these other people who have VHRs around them are not having a sense of community, or what the other. This is a subjective matter, and it's what you make of it. And to Eddie earlier, who called in and made a statement about it's costing more for construction and things like that. That's the economy in general. I mean, wake up to that. There's supply chains, whether you're in 29 Palms or anywhere, it's gonna cost more no matter what. This is an economy-based thing. This is nothing to do with VHRs coming in, and we have to look at the bigger picture. When they have VHRs coming in, it's building the economy and the city. More parks can be built based on the profits made from this, and more businesses will come here, and more people will go to Joshua Tree and go to the national parks. So I am all on with VHRs. I think it's great. I understand a cap is necessary. Yeah, sure. Let's not just let everyone go willy-nilly, and maybe one day 100% of 29 Palms is all VHRs. But at a 7% or 10% cap, we're talking 5,900 homes. That's 360 homes that are only allowed to do VHR. I mean, how else is our city going to grow? So we have to think the bigger picture. And as far as community goes, I'd really like to hear, how is your community now versus how was it without the VHR? I mean, all my neighbors around me agree with me. Some other friends that live down the street, they're the same way. They never felt that big of a sense of community when there wasn't to when there is VHR. No, I don't really see that going on. But we are meeting a lot of really interesting people at the local coffee shops, right? At the local pizza place in Joshua Tree and all around. I'm seeing people from all types of walks of life, and I love it.
Sir,
are we on?
his limit's up. That's 4.5 minutes, sir.
Okay. Thank you for your comments.
Oh, thank you.
All right, next we'll call on Allie Dyer Blumel. You're unmuted. Let's go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the time and for hearing my comments and for your work up to this point in the process. Just for a little bit of background, I'm coming from the perspective not of somebody who has seen this community and grown up here, but as somebody who has moved here from another town in Colorado that was also heavily tourist-based and really struggled with this about 10 years ago, and had grown up there and really got to see kind of what happens when this gets kicked down the road and when the local community really has to suffer with predominantly wealthy stakeholders who are from out of town owning the majority of the property there, and how much that does break the community. And ultimately that was part of the reason that we left, and part of the reason that we came here is just because we wanted to be able to come someplace that had like a really rich and interesting local culture. And so I can kind of come from the perspective of what not to do, I guess. And hopefully that secondhand gold is useful for folks. The community that we moved here for, that makes the area so appealing to other investment owners who have been on this call, is made up of the people who live here full time, not of the folks who own property to try and make it an investment, the folks who are just trying to flip it. It is the people who are in your community. And if you really skew that balance pretty heavily, you do kind of ultimately lose the reason why people want to be vacationing here. And so I think it is really important for your local policy to continue to reflect the prioritization of people who actually live here, and making sure that they feel comfortable and enriched in their community, and also that they can afford to live here long term. It is a little disappointing to hear the pushback around like permitting and rules being put in place, that it's too much work. Like I do understand, I was a city government journalist for 5 years, that is obviously something that has to be taken into consideration. But that work doesn't go away by kicking it down the road and to the point where you have to retroactively apply it. It's going to be a topic, and at some point it's going to have to be addressed, and it might as well be done at the very beginning when you kind of can have a little bit more handle on the issue. And then I guess the final point that I kind of want to make is the rental properties here do drive up the local cost. Like you can put that on just the general cost of housing going up and construction materials going up. We bought here in August and definitely felt that. But the Airbnb and like VHR market here is also to blame for that. And the more that you let that inflate your local rates, the harder it is for folks to come in who genuinely want to invest in your community on a full-time basis to do so. And that is something to take into consideration as you want your community to grow. And with that, that's the end of my comment. Again, I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to Chandra Baxter. You're unmuted. Go ahead. You'll need to unmute yourself, Chandra.
Hi, sorry about that. Thank you. I'm here with my full.
Chandra, you're breaking up really bad. It looks like you're connected through the web.
And we're surrounded by 3 sides with folding Bs.
Chandra, you're breaking up really bad. Would you like to just type your comment and I'll read it into the record, or do you want to call in and raise your hand again? Looks like you're connected through a web browser and it's breaking up pretty heavily. Sorry, we can't hear you at all. Okay. I'll go ahead and move on to the next one. Is D. So you're unmuted on our end. Go ahead. You'll need to unmute yourself on your end. Okay. Guess I'll move on to Vino Nathraj. Go ahead, Vino.
Thank you, Eli. In fact, I actually like this new Gold Rush. When I drive into the city today and I see the improvements done to the houses that were bought from the absentee owners, I like that. In fact, I'm in the hotel business and I think there's a market for VHR and for hotels. Those who want to stay at the VHR will go ahead and stay at the VHR, and those who want to stay at the hotel would go ahead and stay at the hotel. I like what Cindy said, Cindy Bernard said that if I am an empty nester, I should be able to rent 1 or 2 of my rooms, not all year round, and don't have to go through all these hoops of becoming a vacation rental. And it's very easy to find out that whether you're staying there by being a registered voter. Now, I do intend to build my house in the city, and I know my kids won't be staying with my wife and I, and we'll be an empty nest. And I'd like to rent the room and have some company. Now, there'll be no hardship for me to prove to the council that I have a hardship because I've been in business a long time ago. So, but the most important thing to me is to make sure that the life and safety is taken into consideration. And I'm glad to see that the city council and the staff is putting in ordinances. I have a couple of questions for our city manager. Is the VHR classified hotels to collect TOT? Then do they have to apply for a business license? And if those 2 answers are positive, do they have to apply for a CUP, conditional use permit? If the answer is no, that's a huge loss of funds for our city. Then would they get regular inspections like how the hotels are from the health department and the fire department? And this will help to make sure that the life and safety of the community is not compromised. Do they also happen to comply with ADA? And if the answer is no, does the city bear any liability in the future that you granted this license and didn't pay attention to the ADA? I know of a city that's going through a huge turmoil at the present time. So those are the questions I have in regards to life and safety that I want to make sure is not compromised. I welcome the VHR. I drive around the town all the time, and I see the cleanup done on some of the houses. Thank you.
Okay, thank
So,
you.
Mr. Chair, just, all those answers were yes. Yeah, they apply for a business license, they pay for TOT, and that is correct. They do not go through a CUP. And the city doesn't make any money off of the CUP. We just recover costs, but they don't go through a CUP.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I have 8 questions that were sent in. I will read to you now. First one is from Julie Glantz. Will the people who already have active permits be required to attend the newly formed education classes when they are ultimately offered? Next question. What is the current proposed caps coming from Jack Chang? And next question. A few months, let me see this comment I'm trying to see here. It's a big one. Okay. From Thomas Murtaugh. A few months ago, we counted approximately 20 boarded up properties in the Hanson tract. Board ups are actually part of the residential characteristics of our area. They remain a magnet for drug users, criminals, and our children, as well as threats of fire. There is one directly behind our home. Squatters were recent neighbors. Don't know if they vote here. How many board ups are there? Question. Are they counted in the overall, quote, inventory of homes? Question. Can we consider allowing boarded up properties to be allowed STR permits to incentivize their return to civilization? If not, can we at least put a reasonable cap on the number of boarded up and derelict properties in 29 Palms? It could be a percentage basis or by distance from non-boarded up properties. And next comment.
Eli, let me just make a comment about some of those other questions about the caps.
Okay.
Until it goes to the planning commission, until the city council, we can't really answer those, what the caps are going to be until we actually get to those to those voting bodies. So everybody's asking about what the cap is going to be. This committee cannot say definitely what the cap is going to be.
Okay. We have a comment from Heidi and Chuck Hurd. Well, maybe the speakers should have had a block party. These guests are not contributing to the structure of the community, coaching park and rec, kids in school, volunteering, etc. Next, we have a comment from Kathy Santiago. Can you please describe how it is legally and ethically allowed to fine an individual without warning? We'll remove Vinos as he was able to speak. Next, we have a comment from Julie Glantz. I had an experience recently with a newly established STVHR behind my property. They made their application in August. I only received notification of this in mid-November, and the time period for me to respond and appeal had almost entirely lapsed. So none of us were given a voice in advance. I hoped to at least go and meet my new neighbors, but I was only exposed to their partying of their loud, late-night guests. They weren't on site. When I called the code number, I got nowhere. I was told no one would be available until Monday. By then, the guests were gone. Why did it take almost 4 months to let me know what was happening? Why couldn't I reach anyone at the city code number? And why aren't new permit holders required to actually meet and get a sense of the lives of their neighbors, who their future guests might be impacting? So as far as how this relates to caps, do I really want 3 or 4 of those anonymous neighbors right over my back fence? Next comment. Next comment is from, go ahead.
So Eli, that person who just mentioned about the code enforcement call, and they couldn't get
Julie Glantz, yes.
Yeah, can you get her contact information? Because I want to find out if that was a recent issue, because we have that weekend service starting back in November. So
we have everyone's contact information as a matter.
Okay, good. Can I follow up with her then on that, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. We have the next comment is from Patricia Knight. I have a couple of questions. I do not have a microphone, is her statement. 1, why remove the 2-night minimum requirement? 1-night stays open up the property to parties. 2, how is having to meet guests in person going to be enforced? Proposed change I'm referring to, all STVHRs must utilize in-person check-in to ensure that guests have read the rules of the house and understand the special character of fragile desert environments. A good neighbor policy must be reviewed and signed by all guests in the presence of a manager or owner. Julie Glantz commented, Frank, back to you that it was in December. Okay, we have another question from our Chandra Baxter. This is the young lady whose web browser was cutting her out. Hello, my family and I have been local residents for over 20 years. I live up on Lupine and Mojave Avenue, 29 Palms, and I am surrounded on 3 sides by absentee owner Airbnbs. I don't appreciate it, especially the large window of Airbnb faced directly at our home. I am most worried about the density and lack of available long-term rentals for locals. I believe uncapped Airbnb numbers are contributing to the housing crisis. Also, we do not have enough stores to support the rising tourists. There could be 3 less homeless local families as my neighbors. And let me send that. We'll see where we're at. I have a comment from a panelist, Max Walker. Max, you can make the comment yourself when he opens it back up to you guys. So I have no other hands raised and no other questions outstanding. If anyone else wish, oh, hold on, I have D So, who was had his hand raised earlier but was unable to speak. All right, D, I've unmuted you on my end. Go ahead.
Okay, and I unmuted on my end. Just a couple comments. I've been here in the town a while. Back, I was a real estate loan processor in the previous big housing boom in the 80s. So I was concerned then, and I think a lot of the abandoned, rundown, certainly some, but not all, were from investors swooping in at that time, getting great loans, lots of buildings. And I just have a feeling that at some point, the short-term vacation rental market is going to bottom out as well. Couple comments. I am surrounded by short-term rentals. Prior to that, we did have a lot of block parties with long-term rentals, permanent residents. And I just have a question. If permanent residents are going to get pushed out, where are these businesses going to find people to work at? We've had nice restaurants close because they couldn't get help. Wasn't our local Starbucks just closed for a week? I don't quite know why, but I'm just guessing with perhaps they couldn't get help. I mean, where are people to work and the business is going to come from if no one lives here permanently? And yes, I can see the draw to our area. The park is lovely. It's been here longer than any of us, but the park doesn't exist to make money for the city. So I am certainly in favor of caps. I'm in a high density neighborhood like some of the others. And yeah, talk about a bonfire. One of them started a bonfire that was encroaching onto my property this last weekend. So yeah, They don't care. They're going to be gone. And I can see they want to get their money's worth if they're out here renting for a weekend. One of the properties up on the hill that rents for $1,700 a night. If I'm paying that, I want to get my money's worth. And they're going to be gone in 1 or 2 days, however. So I definitely support caps. I wish the city could look at other avenues. I know the city has to make money or it'll become a ghost town. But what about tapping into the wonderful, lucrative film industry? There's got to be other ways other than pushing out permanent residents. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. I have no other hands raised and no other questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Eli. Frank, we got some letters email wise. Did all the panelists get those emails?
They have, yes.
Okay, so they were able to read all of them. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so just so everybody who did write in emails to the city, all the panelists did receive them, so they were all read. And so, okay, well, okay, Eli, you have no one else for the public comment?
I have no one else right now.
Okay, so then we'll go back to the panelists then. So obviously there's can you scroll down, Frank, or up, which to the beginning of the agenda? Okay. Okay, so so really,
yeah. So Mr. Mayor, the question, or Mr. Chair, the question is, at this point, based on everything that is in front of you, the recommendations that were made, are you satisfied with it and want to push it on to the Planning Commission? Is there any changes that you would like to make? You want to have further meetings of this committee? Those are what's in front of the committee at this point.
So for panelists, is there any other changes besides what we discussed that we want to send to the Planning Commission? Go ahead, Cindy.
Mr. Chairman, I think we've reiterated the same points over again, and we just keep doing. So yeah, I'm going to push that we push this to the Planning Commission, because even when the Planning Commission works through their regulation or their draft ordinance, there's still going to be public hearings at that time too. So for those of us on the Planning Commission, we'll be going through this again.
Okay, thank you,
Can
Jim.
I comment? Because
Yes.
I was recognized. Thanks.
Yes, Cindy, go ahead.
Just a couple of things. One of the public members brought up the elimination of the 2-night minimum. I agree. I really don't understand why we're getting rid of the 2-night minimum. And in fact, the 2-night minimum is in the proposed regulations that the county has just released as well. So the committee that's dealing with county regulations also is proposing a 2-night minimum. And we did have a few letters that recognized that they were not happy with the loss of the 2-night minimum. And in fact, I don't know why we got rid of it. So there's that. I also wanted to address the questions about absentee owners. Of course, I recognize that there are owners that live in 29 Palms, but when we ran stats, or I should say my organization ran stats back in September, in fact, I think it was like 60% of the owners were absentee owners. So it's a majority of the owners do not live here, do not live in Joshua Tree, do not live in 29, do not live in the Morongo Basin. They live somewhere else. We haven't run those stats again recently, but I suspect that hasn't changed. With regard to the board ups, yeah, I mean, I concur. The board ups are a real issue, and it's an ongoing issue. And if there were a way for the city to develop, maybe take some of the TOT and create some kind of incentive fund to turn those over into STVHRs or even housing, that would be fabulous. And I agree. I think this city probably should be more proactive on how to deal with properties that are abandoned and boarded up. I think that's a great idea. And I think looking at my notes, I did want to also point out that it's a useful read to look at the the proposals that are in the county regulations. There were some interesting ideas there. The way that they spoke about their permit limits was interesting. The way they qualified owners as having 2 or more than 2 as a business entity was interesting. They had a limit on the number of daytime guests that could be at an STVHR that was interesting. So I think that if planning, as they look at the regulations, take a look at what the county is looking at, you'll find some things that could be useful for us here as well. Yeah, that's it for now.
Okay, thank you. So, well, as far as you brought up a couple points, and we've discussed them, we voted on those. Do you want to make a motion to change something, or does any other committee? Because if we're not, we're just going to move forward.
Chairman, so I have a comment from the public there. She's asking, Julie Glantz is asking, what about all of the unanswered questions? So I'm assuming all the questions we read into the record, they were looking for them to get asked. And then I don't know, I'm just relaying that on for you.
Thank you. Well, some of the questions were asked were what the cap number was going to be. If we're, the committee has said that they were suggesting a cap. We do not have a number for that. And like I say, those numbers won't come up until they go through the venting at the planning commission and ultimately at the city council.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, Eli, Julie, was she the one who had the called code enforcement and didn't get a response?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, just let her know. I'll reach out to her personally and, you know, try to help answer any questions that she has that may be unanswered.
I mean, okay, and I have other comments as well. I don't know if you want me to read them to you or what you want.
Did they write them in?
They wrote them in, yes.
Okay, go ahead and read them, please.
Okay, so Jonathan Hume said, where is the evidence that a 2-night minimum reduces parties? As a host, I can tell you many of our best guests are single night guests, many of whom are just passing through on a road trip, and some later return for a longer visit. Also imposing 2-night minimum slashes work for housekeepers. And then I have Julie, questions about education for those who already have their permits. So her question is about will they be required? People who already have permits be required to go through the education program, and when will that be offered?
Yeah, so you know, that's more from an operational perspective. You know, what we would probably, and obviously the Planning Commission Council can, you know, would definitely chime in on this. Even people that, you know, currently have permits, you know, a lot of licensing requires, like, you know, every 2 years or every 3 years you have to go through an educational period. So it would be, we have to work out that as details, but it would be something like that.
Okay, and then I do have.
Yeah, that would be on the other. We would be under when you renew. What I think that the committee discussed at one point.
There's another question from D. So could the city define what makes characteristics of a neighborhood? I think that needs to be less nebulous. Permanent residents have a different definition that I think the city does. And then Julie Glantz replied, okay. So we do also have a hand raised from Vino. Do you want me to open that up? Do you want me to open that up?
Yeah, yes, go ahead. Just
okay. Vino, go ahead and unmute yourself. You're open.
Thank you. In fact, I have a question for Jim and Krishna. If I heard right, you said that you have a vacation rental. If you have a vacation rental, don't you think it's a conflict of interest to be sitting on this panel and giving comments, Jim?
He doesn't have a vacation rental.
I don't have a vacation rental.
Okay, thanks. In fact, then I go ahead and ignore that. Jim, please accept my apology. I thought I heard you saying that you have a vacation rental. Thank you.
Actually, Jim has made it very clear.
I own another house. I own another house that's being renovated, but I do not have a vacation rental.
Thank you for clearing.
I own more than one house. I do not have a vacation rental.
Okay, thank you.
I actually had a question, Frank. Oh, can you hear me? No.
Yes, they can hear you.
Yes. Something that, a few people refer to is what, this sort of idea of what happens if they have a permit, or what happens when the regulations happen. And perhaps since there's so many people listening, it would be useful to explain that there's a process that's going to happen once the regulations take place, with whether or not things are in compliance and whether or not things are grandfathered in, or whether there's or what that process is. Can you put it in a nutshell?
Yeah, so for, and just by way of example, and this is probably the most germane. So if there was a recommendation from the committee, the planning commission, the council, that puts you as a current vacation home rental in non-compliance, you would be considered a legal non-conforming. So that you would continue to operate until some time, and that some time is something that has to be defined by the council. So anything that the committee, the council, the planning commission, the council adopt that puts you in non-compliance, it's not like tomorrow you have to cease and desist.
Okay, thank you, Frank. So I guess where we're at right now is this committee ready to send these recommendations to the planning commissions. So I guess I'm looking for a roll call vote on if we're ready to move forward to the planning commission.
Councilmember Mintz, can I make a comment real quick? This is Max.
Yes, Max, you may.
So there was a question asked if somebody's going to advocate for caps on the planning commission, and I intend to do so. Also, I think we should make a recommendation that the planning commission try to better develop the definition of a residential characteristics, or we strike it from the ordinance, because it is very hard to define. But I think we should try to put some effort into defining it, because I don't generally think we did on the committee.
That could be brought up at your level, but yes, when it comes to the planning commission, that's not the planning commissioner or any other planning commissioner can bring that up. And then obviously, I can almost predict that because when this first happened, I believe, what was there, 5 meetings? I'd have to recall. I believe there's at least 5 meetings before this was enacted. So I can predict it's not going to be done in one meeting. So yes, to answer your question, it's in your purview to have that discussed.
Yeah, but other than that, I am good with just like Jim said, sending this to the planning commission.
Okay, so that's
I just wanted to comment regarding the advocating for caps, and I also wanted to assure the person or people that were concerned about the continued advocating for caps that 29 Palms neighbors and me personally would of course be going to planning commission meetings and continuing to advocate for caps as well. And if the planning commission were to get rid of the idea of caps, which would not be unexpected, we will continue to advocate to city council if they put them back in.
Okay, but that's not what we're talking about now. Thank you. Okay, so is this committee ready to move forward? I have 2 people have said yes, Jim and Max. Jim Thornburg. I'm sorry, Jim.
I second Max. I think Max made a motion to push it forward, and I second.
Okay, so I have a motion and a second. Can we have a roll call vote, please, Frank?
Yes. Cindy?
Yes.
Committee member, Chairman Mintz?
Yes.
Committee member Bilderain?
Yes.
Commissioner Walker?
Yes.
Commissioner Krushat?
Yes.
Committee member Fowler?
Yes.
And committee member Thornburg?
Yes.
It's a unanimous vote.
Okay, well so this is so there's no reason for us to have another meeting because this is all going to the planning commission now. I want to thank staff, Matthew and Frank. You guys did a great job with this. And committee members, I want to thank each and every one of you for all of the time and hours we spent on this. And we have more, there'll be more in front of us, so we'll just keep working at it. And the next step is the planning commission.
So are we formally adjourned as a committee member at this point?
If it's going to the planning commission, I would think so, yes. Is there, I don't see any reason, we can't meet and then the planning commission meet at the same time. That's, Frank, I don't think that wouldn't be prudent, would it?
No, I mean, you had a purpose. This committee had a purpose, and the purpose has been fulfilled. So this meeting would, be adjourned. This committee would be adjourned.
So this, yes, to answer your question, Cindy, yes, when we adjourn this meeting, this committee is done. Now it's on to the planning commission. Okay, anybody from the panel like to make any other comment before I adjourn this meeting? Okay.
It's been lovely.
Okay, seeing then, this committee meeting is adjourned, and thank you all.
Bye-bye.